culturally, there's a perception that women change their mind more. But I also think culturally, there's a perception that it's not okay for men to change their mind. If a man changes his mind, he looks like he's inconsistent. Now, everybody in the cultural conversation about mental health, they talk about mental strength, but very few people talk about mental agility. As you get older, mental agility is probably the most important dynamic in your mental capacity. Some people, I think, are more predisposed to becoming mentally rigid faster. I think some people are more predisposed to being more mentally agile.
In your book, you talk about these 12 mind shifts. There's actually 13 because mind shift 0 is change your mind. And what I've learned is that a willingness to change your mind, especially in the face of new evidence, it corresponds with our ability to let go. And so someone who is not willing to change their mind, maybe they're not willing to let go of their past in order to get to the future that they want to go to.
Yeah, I agree. I think the question is really interesting. And even when she puts it in male, female kind of categories, which makes me a little nervous. But I actually think that culturally, there's a perception that women change their mind more. But I also think culturally, there's a perception that it's not okay for men to change their mind. And if a man changes his mind, he looks like he's inconsistent. And if a woman changes her mind, a lot of times it seems that she's adaptive. And so it can go either way. You know, in some ways, it depends on what you're changing your mind about and when. If you're changing your mind when it's convenient to you, like you have hard lines when it relates to other people, but soft lines when it relates to you, then I could see why someone might be upset. Wait a minute, you had this position yesterday. What's going on? But I think it's really important actually to change your mind. In fact, I think it's a great practice. And everybody in the cultural conversation about mental health talks about mental health. They talk about mental strength, but very few people talk about mental agility. And the reality is that as you get older, mental agility is probably the most important dynamic in your mental capacity. I'm 65. And the way people are seen when they get older is, well, you're supposed to become rigid. But the reality is that I meet a lot of 25-year-olds and 35-year-olds who are incredibly mentally rigid. They're dogmatic. They're very, very slow to change. They're resistant to new ideas. And I think a huge part of it is that I've spent my life developing mental agility. And so what I would say is more than thinking about changing your mind is keeping your mind agile to new information, to new dynamics, to new environments, new circumstances, to realize that you may think you know something, but you only believe something, which is different than knowing. And which is kind of funny because my wife and I were very, very different. We've taken this assessment called the Strength Finder, and her number 2 strength is called belief. My wife is structured where she has 2 or 3 beliefs and she holds them really tightly. My belief would be way at the bottom. I have something called ideation. I have 1,000 ideas, and I'm not even sure if I agree with my ideas. And I remember we were driving one time, and I'd been to this place she'd never been. And we got to a turn. She goes, "Turn right." And I knew it was left. But I'd been married 40 years, and I know how to be happy. So I just turned right because she insisted. And I said, "Honey, it's left." She goes, "No, it's right." So we turned right, and I just started driving. And I just kept driving and driving and driving until she got really quiet. And then she said, "You might want to turn around." and as we turned around and we're driving, I said, "I just want to understand something." And she said, "What's that?" And I said, "What does it feel like to be so right?" Like to be so certain that you're right. I said, because even though I'd been there when you said turn right and you were so dogmatic, I began questioning myself, going, well, maybe I just thought it was left. Maybe I remembered wrong. You'd never been there, but you knew it was right. Some people, I think, are more predisposed to becoming mentally rigid faster. I think some people are more predisposed to being more mentally agile. And it's just like with super athletes. We're not all going to be Olympians, but we should pay attention to what they do to become healthier. I play chess, and I play with a computer at 2200, which is fairly high. And he just absolutely destroys me. But I'm only going to learn if I play someone, in a sense, smarter than me. And it's really important to learn from people who instinctively or almost intuitively do something better than us. And so I pay attention to people who are mentally agile. And I try to learn their characteristics and try to take on characteristics like curiosity, imagination, exploration, new experiences, because I know those things actually help me. And when you're mentally agile, you start making the shifts that you need to make. You make the mind shifts that are necessary at the right time in your life.
That's right. I think there's a relationship that can be had between structure and change that can be really useful for people that have this kind of challenge. So I remember I had a mentor helping me schedule out my day. And as she was writing down all the things I would do, I says, wait a minute. This is just too much structure. I don't want to be someone that's stressed out all the time. And I reacted to her writing down when I would sleep and when I would have recreation time. And I thought that was just an insane way to live. And she says, do you know who's really stressed out in life? It's not the people that schedule recreation time. It's the people like you who just improv their way through everything, and your recreation time and your sleep time gets away from you. Aren't you coming to me because you're already stressed out? And I said, that's a really good point. Well, there's a similar kind of structure we can create around our freedom to change our minds. One example of this would be if you want to try something new, instead of just saying, I'm going to try it, and then when I feel a different emotion, I'm going to try something else, say, okay, how long am I going to try it for? Like, I'm going to take a little freedom away so that I can know what it means to try this thing. I'm going to try it for 1 week. And even if on day 3, I absolutely hate it and don't want to do it anymore, I'm going to finish that 1 week commitment that I made, and then I change my mind. And so sometimes you can have an easier time giving yourself the permission to change if you just say when you want to do something. It's going to be 30 days, it's going to be 2 weeks, it's going to be 7 days. And that way, when you don't feel it anymore, you still have some consistency of doing what you said you were going to do.
What about the guilt that is associated with change? As Leanne brings up, that seems to be what she's really struggling with here. Like, I'd love to change my mind about these things, but then I feel guilty, or these other people shame me for having changed my mind.
They're usually shaming you because you held them to the standard that now you're changing. And so some of it is processing, helping them understand why you used to see it a certain way and what has happened in your life to help you move to a different change that allows you to see it a new way.
Yeah.
And because usually people aren't upset if you change, if it makes their life better.
That's a real good point.
They're not happy if you're making a change that affects their life in a negative way, or if it seems to suddenly give you a freedom you didn't give them. Because if you're telling your kids you have to go to bed at 8 o'clock at night, and then they see that you go to bed at 11, they're like, wait a minute, how come I have to go to bed at 8 and you get to stay up till 11? And you go, well, it's because I'm the adult, right? Or something like that. But eventually there comes a shift where you're going, wait a minute, you give yourself this freedom, but you don't give me this freedom, right? And so I think when you're making a shift in your life, the shame can sometimes come because we don't admit we've made a change. We're trying to act like, no, we're being consistent. We didn't change. You don't experience any shame when you go, yeah, I used to believe that. And I've gone through this and now I believe this. Or I used to live my life with that kind of structure or, ideology, but now I've grown, and let me tell you why. I think people are incredibly respectful when you acknowledge you've changed and then you help them understand the process.
Sometimes when you're in these leadership positions and you're a visionary and you've got a high creativity, you can change on a dime, and the people that you're changing up things for are like, well, wait a minute, we built the whole system around the previous way. How are we going to adapt? So what do you do when you're in that situation? How do you change for good and help give security to the people who feel like, all right, well, what happens if you get a new inspiration in 7 seconds?
Yeah, no, I just had a leader ask me the same question. And I said, the reason you have a problem is because you committed people to a strategy rather than to an intention. If you commit to an intention, strategies change all the time. And what you help people understand is that strategy used to work to fulfill this intention, this purpose. But now that strategy doesn't work. So we're keeping our intention, we're changing the strategies. The best way to help a person deal with change is to help them see what doesn't change and why you're changing what you're changing so it stays in alignment with your values and your vision.